Hey, it's me, Mayo, and I promised you I'd be with you today. Um, Various agencies, from the Board of Health to the District of Conestoga Valley, have decided that I need a little more time removed from you guys, and so I will abide by the rules and come to you via technology. I would like to Zoom live with you, but I'm told I'm not allowed to do that. So we're going to do the best we can. Um, Here's the plan. You're going to watch this video and listen to what I have to say and look at the PowerPoint and listen to me address some other stuff about the 1920s today. Then you're going to have an online discussion through Schoology, where I may or may not make a live real-time appearance on Tuesday. Then you'll have the time to work quietly and independently on your 1920s choice project, because that is still due Wednesday. We're going to try to stay on pace. If we have to modify a few things next week, we will do so. So don't panic. I will take care of you. All right. So look, the topic today, and I really wanted to do this in person because I really wanted some discussion, some give and take. So about racism and nativism. One of the days last week in my absence, I guess Thursday, you read about the 1921 Tulsa race massacre, where the white community of Tulsa just absolutely turned on the black population and slaughtered them, destroyed an entire very ritzy, very well-off area economically, and basically robbed generations of African Americans of wealth and prosperity. And I did allude to the fact earlier that the 20s is a very negative decade as far as race in the United States. For all the other positive things, the economy and the automobile and jazz, and there are positive steps regarding race relations. We're a pretty racist culture in the 20s. And so let's start by taking a look at what I'm going to label racism and nativism here and go through this PowerPoint. And then I want to make some points about that reading from last week and that episode. All right, so racism, I assume that you guys know what racism is. Nativism is the belief in the superiority of native-born Americans, meaning people born here. It's the belief that immigrants can never fully be 100% loyal to the United States. The only people who are 100% loyal to America are people born here in America. And so we're going to kind of break this down. We're going to talk about immigrants and immigration quotas. Then we're going to talk about nativism. We're going to talk about some specific examples that show people or groups that exemplify these attitudes. And so let's start with immigration quotas. In 1924, Congress is going to pass an immigration quota law. For the first time, we're going to put a limit on the number of people that come into this country, and we're going to be very specific about it. Basically, if you're from England or Germany or France or Norway or Sweden, basically northern, really read that as white Europe, all you guys that want to come in can come in. If you're from Southern Europe, a little darker people, Spain, Italy, Greece, fewer of you. If you're from Eastern Europe, Russia, Poland, areas where people have some stranger ideas, anarchy, communism, Russian Bolshevism, even less. And then we're going to ban Japanese people entirely. So the 1924 immigration quota. The law was passed. It set limits on how many people from specific countries could be admitted to the United States, and it banned Japanese immigration specifically because when we looked at those political cartoons last week, we talked about the fact that the Japanese are an entity we're beginning to fear and distrust. I was looking at these pictures here. This is shiploads of immigrants coming into Ellis Island in New York, and one on the upper left just shows a lot of people look like they're coming here for an opportunity to be successful. I look at the picture on the bottom right, and I'm thinking, man, we need to let these people in. That woman has skills. We want her here. And if that is her son holding her baby, that is the biggest, strongest baby I've ever seen. And I think we gotta let these people in. They look like hard workers. All right, so nativism. Let's talk about this. This is a really annoying and disturbing ideology. Nativism was the belief that native-born Americans were superior to immigrants, and immigrants, again, could never be 100% loyal to America. The thought being that, hey, if you're an Italian immigrant, I'll pick on Italians because my family came here from Italy, or at least half my family did. If you're Italian, you're always going to be Italian American. You're never going to be just American. Now, that's ridiculous because you know, even people that are second or third generation Italians, you know, I'm proud of the fact that, you know, my family is Italian. Technically, I guess I'm Italian American. You know, I'm also a German American. Um, this idea being that, you know, if you're a recent immigrant, your loyalties are split. You still have this affection for the motherland, or, you know, where you came from. But I would, you know, those of you brought up in a religious tradition, you know this. People that join your church, people that convert to your religion, a lot of times they're the fanatics. They're the ones that know all the rules. They're the ones that are like really into it. If you were born into it, you're kind of like, yeah, that's what we do, whatever. The other people are like, no, you understand why, and you know this is. And so I would say immigrants are actually some of the best Americans. They've just recently learned the history and the way the government works, and they got to pass a test to become a citizen. You know, the citizenship test isn't easy. You know, so becoming an American is work. And if you came from some war-torn area like Syria, or some really, really poverty-stricken area like some country in Africa or Southeast Asia, or anywhere like that, and you get to be here, you're an enthusiastic and patriotic American. And so there's absolutely nothing to this concept that just by being born an American, you're a better American than people that move here. Especially because the people that have this attitude a lot of times are as recently American as having grandparents that came here. And suddenly now they think they're better than other immigrants. So nativism has absolutely no merit, but people in the 1920s believed it pretty strongly. Americans in general did, yes. An example of this nativism at work, and this is a really sad story, and I know this came up in your reading, but you know, two Italian immigrants, Sacco and Vanzetti, going to be wrongfully accused of a robbery and murder. They both had alibis, but they didn't speak really good English. They had been anarchists, and so they were suspect because of that. They didn't understand the criminal justice system real well. The trial was all circumstantial evidence. If they had, I think any one of us probably could have represented them just from watching crime shows on television and done a better job than their attorney. And they ended up being convicted and sentenced to death for a crime they obviously did not commit. They were killed in the electric chair in Massachusetts in 1927. Now, the good news is that in 1977, 50 years later, the governor of Massachusetts at that time said, hey, they didn't get a fair trial. It was all circumstantial evidence. And he declared them not guilty. And so they got that going for them. But basically, they were arrested because the cops knew, hey, look, we have no idea who did it, but we're going to arrest these guys. We take advantage of the fact they don't know the language, they don't know the system. They're immigrant anarchists, and so people believe, yeah, those guys must have done it. Way to go, cops, you did your job. And this is not an anti-police attitude. This is an anti-1920s nativism attitude. And then we have these idiots. The Ku Klux Klan. You guys know they were formed after the Civil War. You read a little bit about them in your summer reading. They virtually die out, but the 1920s, you know, after World War I, they come back with a vengeance. The 1920s is going to be the decade where the Klan is the most powerful. They were over 4 million members. And believe it or not, the largest organization, I like to ask this in class, which state do you think had the largest Klan chapter? And people always guess, you know, Texas, Alabama, Georgia, you know, the usual suspects. And you'd be right to think along those lines. But by the way, Indiana had the largest Klan chapter. And you can kind of understand why for two reasons. Number one, if you've ever been to Indiana, those people are literally white. I mean, they are the whitest people I've ever seen. But the largest Catholic university is also Notre Dame in South Bend, Notre Dame, South Bend, Indiana. And the Klan in the 20s is anti-Black, like they always have been, anti-immigrant, anti-Jewish, and anti-Catholic. Basically, they want you to be white, Anglo-Saxon, that means of basically English descent or English-Irish descent, and they want you to be Protestant. And so if you're outside that at all, they hate you. So they really branched down. You got to like the diversity of their hatred, I suppose. One reason they hate Catholics is they believe Catholics can never be loyal Americans because they think Catholics will always be loyal to the Pope first. And so they have, you know, a leader they serve outside America. And of course, they're going to use violence propaganda against Blacks, Catholics, Jews, and immigrants. This group is scary. I mean, they're a punchline more today, but they're scary in the 20s. There's 7 different states where you can't get elected senator, you can't elect a governor unless you have the support of the Klan. That was required Otherwise, people wouldn't vote for you. And they provided a lot of money. In 1926, they actually marched in Washington, D.C., 60,000 of them. And that's scary. I want to make no mistake about it, the Klan is a domestic terrorist organization. And they rose to prominence in the 20s. They also helped pay for, support, and install a lot of the Confederate monuments that you hear about in the news sometimes, controversial. We want to tear down, this monument of Robert E. Lee or Jefferson Davis or whatever. They didn't go up after the Civil War to honor Civil War veterans. They went up during the 1920s to kind of remind blacks that they need to stay in their place and who has the real power in the South. And so racism and nativism are strong in the United States in the 20s. Part of it is racism naturally in our culture. Part of it is born out of the end of World War I and this fear of internationalism and this really negative attitude about the war. Part of it is born out of just the bad economy to start out after World War I. And I'm kind of babbling now because I can't find the PowerPoint I'm looking for. And I know I'm recording this, so you're seeing all these mistakes live as they happen, and that's really a lot of fun. So why don't we try closing that, and see if, there we go. Now, when we pull this up, that should show up as something I can share. Marvelous. So look, that's some of the real negative stuff. And we'll return to the real negative stuff when I talk about last week's reading. I want to talk about the positive stuff. The Harlem Renaissance. Here's what you got to love. Okay, African Americans in the United States, despite the way they've been treated throughout their entire history, from slavery to Jim Crow to segregation, when given the opportunity to interact creatively, African Americans are going to gift America with some of the best art and some of the best literature and some of the best poetry and some of the best music. And that comes in the 1920s through something called the Harlem Renaissance. Harlem is a neighborhood in New York. In the 20s, is almost exclusively an African American neighborhood. The word Renaissance means rebirth. So this is a rebirth of African American culture in the 1920s up in Harlem. Big part of the Harlem Renaissance was this guy, Langston Hughes. Langston Hughes was a writer, specifically he's a poet. He's known as the Poet Laureate of Harlem. That means he is the best poet in Harlem. Real leader. And he is going to encourage the art and the music and the literature of this group. And he is really, really outstanding. This is information kind of about his first book of poetry and who he was. You can go back and pick that up at any point. I want to kind of move on here. Here's the big thing I want you to know, that the Langston Hughes poetry is the first time an African-American author wrote reflecting the uniquely African-American experience. All black writers before Langston Hughes tried to emulate white writers. Hey, Edgar Allan Poe is really popular. I'm going to try to write like Edgar Allan Poe. Hey, Mark Twain's really popular. I'm going to try to write like Mark Twain. Langston Hughes said, hey, I don't know anything about those guys. I mean, I read their stuff, but I don't know who they are. The only thing I know really well, the only thing I can write about honestly is me. And his friend said, well, you can't do that. Americans aren't going to want to read what it's like to be black in America. He said, well, I don't talk to ravens, so I can't write like Edgar Allan Poe. And, I've never been on a Mississippi steamboat, so I can't write like Mark Twain. I can only write like Langston Hughes. Besides, being black in America, okay, means there are emotions and experiences that we have as a shared story with white Americans. So look, normally if we were in class together, I'd ask this. So just participate at home by yourself, or as you're sitting in class, I guess, watching this. How many people have ever felt left out? How many people have ever felt as though they've been treated unfairly or unjustly? How many people feel as though they're not given the benefit of the doubt many times? Okay, and so I'm going to assume that at some point, every one of you raised your hand for at least one of those criteria. Welcome to being black in America. And so Langston Hughes says, people will be able to identify with that. Yes, maybe when I felt treated unjustly or left out, it's because I was black. Maybe for somebody else, it's because they were Catholic or Jewish or whatever. So people, my writing will still resonate, even if it's a personal experience. So he didn't copy the style of white writers. He wrote from his own perspective, and he became successful because of that. Perhaps his most famous poem is this one, and technically it's not called A Dream Deferred. It's part of a larger poem and collection of poems. But he basically said, and I love his poetry because it's simple. It's not simple because he wasn't brilliant enough to write really complex poetry. He could have, but we've all been in the English class where we're reading a poem and maybe we even like it a little bit, but then the teacher ruins it by insisting that we have no idea what it means, and you need the teacher as the key to unlock the meaning. And blue means sadness. Why? Maybe the curtains are just blue, or oh, he walked across the room. That symbolizes a journey. Maybe he was picking up his socks. I don't. It doesn't have to be that complex. And so Langston Hughes says, look, I want what I write to have a really powerful message, but I want it to be accessible. I don't need people to have a cryptogram or an answer key or, some Harvard educated professor to understand what I'm writing. And so in A Dream Deferred, he says, what happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load, or does it explode? All right, now, I made an assumption because you're college students. And you know what the word defer means. And if you don't, it means to put off, postpone, or delay. So he's saying, okay, what happens if you have a dream and you have to constantly push off pursuing that dream? You have to constantly delay having access to that dream. Maybe your dream will just dry up like a raisin in the sun. Maybe it'll fester like a sore and then run. Maybe it'll kind of become like an infection, something that eats away at you. Maybe it'll stink like rotten meat, something just always bothers you. Maybe it'll crust and sugar over like a syrup. It'll just scab and heal and be like, it's okay. Or maybe it'll sag, it'll weigh on you like a heavy load and then explode. In this case, explode means violence. Langston Hughes is not threatening a race war. He's not threatening violence. He's saying white America needs to consider these things. Maybe you can continue to treat black people the way you always have, and it'll be fine. It'll dry up like a raisin in the sun. Maybe it'll become some kind of cancer in our society and eat away at us. Okay, maybe it will weigh on an entire race of people, and eventually they will not tolerate it anymore. Every line is phrased as a question. You say, look, I'm just trying to make you think. I'm not saying what's going to happen. I'm not, threatening anybody. This poem by him, I like even more because I see it as being a little more optimistic. This works on two levels, both literally with, black people in a wealthy home as servants, and as American society, where blacks are kind of shoved to the background. It says, I too sing America. I am the darker brother. They send me to eat in the kitchen when company comes, but I laugh and eat well and grow strong. Tomorrow I'll be at the table when company comes. Nobody will dare say to me, eat in the kitchen then. Besides, they'll see how beautiful I am and be ashamed. I too am American. All right, so look, on a very literal level, group of African Americans work as servants in a home for a wealthy person. Company comes. Hey, you guys all go in the kitchen. Go in the kitchen. Don't want you to be seen. Great. We'll sit there. We'll eat your food. We'll get healthier. We'll grow strong. Someday then, we're going to be with you at the table. And when that happens, you're going to think, oh, man, we were wrong to push these people to the background all that time because they have a lot to say and a lot to contribute. From a societal standpoint, fine, push the background now. But you know what? 500,000 of us moved north during the Great Migration. Our kids are getting better educations. Okay, we have better jobs and higher incomes. Our kids are going to go to college. Our kids are going to become lawyers. They're going to challenge unfair civil rights laws in the court system. That's the eat well and grow strong. And then eventually we should arrive at a place where we sit around and we say, man, we're really embarrassed as a culture that we ever treated black people this way. And we're going to sit there and look at all the contributions they made in science and technology and art and music and politics, in philosophy and everything else, and say, man, we're ashamed that we did that. And so Langston Hughes sees the optimistic future. He just doesn't really define how long that might take. And then this will bring us back to our reading from last week. Langston Hughes said in a poem entitled Democracy, and this is just a short excerpt from it, I tire so of hearing people say, let things take their course. Tomorrow is another day. I do not need my freedom when I'm dead. I cannot live on tomorrow's bread. And basically what white people have historically done is told African Americans during, when slavery was over, in that period of Reconstruction, during the 1920s, during the Civil Rights Movement, even now during the era of Black Lives Matter, you got to be patient. Change takes time. You can't change things overnight. Guys, I got to tell you, overnight has become this really nebulous term. Because if you're a Black person in America, you're part of a group of people that were enslaved for 250 years, openly and callously separated and discriminated against and intentionally kept outside the American dream for another 100 years beyond that. And then even, even when all the laws changed and legally that could not be done anymore, people still exercise that either directly or subtly or in their hearts. And so the question is, man, it's been 400 years. Patience is gone. If you were treated unfairly by a police officer or by the principal of a high school or, the dean of admissions at a college, and you wanted to remedy the situation, and, that you were told, hey, we were wrong. We're going to, over the next 400 years, we're going to fix what we did wrong. That is not going to be an acceptable answer for you. And it shouldn't be an acceptable answer or an expected answer for an entire race of people either. Let's take a look at Tulsa. You read about that incident. So an African American is, by the way, falsely accused of assaulting a white female. And this happened a lot. It happens with somebody named Emmett Till. We'll talk about during the Civil Rights Movement. It happened a lot in the 50s and 60s, and of course the town goes crazy. These black guys have this sex drive. These black guys want to go after white women. And, there's this really overt racism about the whole thing. And what white people did is they then used that as an excuse to destroy an entire area of Tulsa because it was the African American area, that Greenwood area. And African Americans had worked so hard. They did everything right. They built businesses. They were financially successful. They invested money. They deposited money in banks. They saved for their kids' college education. They donated to charities. They created more wealth out of the wealth they were creating. The nickname was Black Wall Street. The African Americans that lived in that Greenwood area, they were wealthy. I mean, they were rich. They were rich by rich white people standards, not just by African American standards. And this single accusation, then the white community took that as an opportunity to destroy the wealth of a generation of African Americans and create poverty for the next 3 generations of African Americans. They destroyed the entire area of town. They looted homes and businesses. It was the white people going in and looting. Okay, and then the thing that infuriates me the most, okay, people are people. Okay, let's say it's just a dozen white people in that entire community that are ringleaders of this whole thing, and they whip everything up into a frenzy, and they convince a couple of 100 white people that there was a rape or what have you, and in just the moment of 2 or 3 days, they go nuts. And then afterward, they think, oh, crap, what have we done? And it's on all the newspapers, and everybody talks about it. And the white people tell us to say, okay, look, we're going to help you rebuild because we really screwed up. But that didn't happen. When it was over, they took it out of newspaper headlines. They basically tried to cover it up. We don't even know the crime that we committed. And all the white people kind of got together and came to the same conclusion that we can't let anybody know about this. We're really glad we did it. And we made money off of it and all that. But, here's how things ripple, okay? Wealthy people are able to provide opportunities for their children. And their children then can often become even more successful than their parents, and their children more so. And you build wealth and success. There are poor white people, and somebody works real hard and is able to send their kid to college, and their kid becomes a doctor, and then their kid has 4 kids, and those kids all go to college, and they become lawyers and doctors, and so over 3 or 4 generations, even more wealth and success and respect is created. And by destroying all that in 1921, you basically said, hey, now your children will be poor, and their children, okay, will not have the opportunity they would have had And so you just took 3 or 4 generations and sentenced them to not having that leg up that they would have otherwise. And this is how, one incident becomes 100 years of setback. And so, the whole Tulsa thing is absolutely reprehensible. And this is one reason why Langston Hughes is saying, look, our impatience is merited, because every time there's something like that, it sets us back a century. So we need it to end now. By the way, Hughes was so successful, he did become the first African-American author to be able to support himself through his writings. And I'm sorry I went on a little longer than I wanted to, but you're a captive audience for the block anyhow. Yeah, these are pictures of Josephine Baker and Duke Ellington and Louis Armstrong and Marcus Garvey and W.E.B. Du Bois and Langston Hughes and Sophie Turner and all kind of other people here that were part of the Harlem Renaissance. So look, I don't know how long this recording has gone on now, but whatever time we left in class, go on the discussion, the online discussion on Schoology under the Mayo absence part, and we can engage each other live. And I'm gonna talk a bit more about Tulsa and some of this stuff. So thanks for listening and watching. Anxious to see you guys again soon, whenever that might be.